the quiet, respectable London suburb of Muswell Hill, a plumbing problem became a portal to the underworld. In the winter of 1983, the drains of 23 Cranley Gardens began to fail. Tenants complained of strange blockages and a foul, persistent odor that clung to the air like a shroud. It was a mundane annoyance, the kind of problem that defines life in a shared building. But the substance pulled from the pipes was not grease or refuse. It was something soft, pale, and unmistakably human. Small bones, fragments of flesh, a biological sludge that told a story no one was prepared to hear. The house from the outside was just another brick facade on a tree-lined street. Inside, in the top-floor flat, lived a quiet civil servant named Dennis Nilsen. And for 5 years, his homes had been abattoirs, tombs, and a desperate, horrifying theater for one. How does a man come to prefer the company of the dead to the living? What alchemy of loneliness, trauma, and pathology turns a human being into a predator who kills not for rage or for lust, but for companionship? The story of Dennis Nilsen is not simply a litany of murders. It is an exploration of a profound void at the heart of a man and a chilling indictment of a society that creates spaces so anonymous that a man can kill at least 12 people and no one notices they are gone. It forces us to ask what we owe to the ghosts of the forgotten, the young men who vanished into the city's indifferent maw. Their names were spoken for the last time in smoky pubs and on rain-slicked streets. Their lives extinguished in a quiet flat by a man who only wanted them to stay. The final tally would be sickening in its scope. From the last days of 1978 to his arrest in early 1983, Dennis Andrew Nilsen murdered at least 12 young men and boys and attempted to kill several more. He was not a phantom who stalked the shadows. He was a government employee, a former police officer, a union representative who walked among his colleagues every day. He was the embodiment of the banal, a quiet neighbor whose private reality was a universe of death, ritual, and decay. This is the story of that universe, from its silent genesis in a cold Scottish fishing town to its putrid, inevitable collapse in a blocked London drain. It is the story of a mind that fractured in a city that looked the other way. The nightmare was born in Fraserburgh, a remote, wind-scoured fishing port on the northeastern coast of Scotland. Here, on November 23, 1945, Dennis Nilsen entered the world. His childhood was a study in emotional austerity, shaped by an absent Norwegian father he barely knew and a devoutly religious mother. The defining figure of his early life was his grandfather, a fisherman whose warmth and affection provided the boy's only true anchor. When Nilsen was just 6 years old, that anchor was torn away. His grandfather died at sea. The family brought the body home for an open casket viewing, and the young boy was led into the room to see him one last time. The sight of that still, silent figure, once so full of life, became the foundational trauma of his existence. In that cold parlor, a catastrophic connection was forged in his developing mind. Love, loss, and the perfect peaceful stillness of death became inextricably intertwined. He grew into a solitary boy, grappling with homosexual feelings in a time and place where such things were unspeakable. His loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion. Seeking structure and escape, he joined the British Army at 16, training as a cook. For 11 years he served, a competent and unremarkable soldier who learned to butcher meat with professional detachment. After the army, he briefly joined the Metropolitan Police, wearing the uniform of the very authority he would later so expertly evade. But the isolation persisted. He was a man adrift in his own life, moving to London and taking a job as a civil servant at a job center, helping others find their place in the world while he remained profoundly lost in his own. In 1975, he found a place to root his growing pathology, 195 Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood, North London. It was a ground-floor flat in an ordinary terraced house, a space that offered him the privacy he craved. The garden backed onto a railway line, providing a degree of isolation. The neighborhood was a transient place full of people coming and going, a landscape of anonymity perfect for a man who wanted to operate unseen. The flat became his sanctuary and his laboratory. It was here, surrounded by his books, his records, and his dog, Bleep, that the quiet civil servant would begin his transformation. The house was not chosen for its sinister qualities, but for its normalcy. It was a stage, perfectly dressed to look like a life, upon which a long rehearsal for death would finally become a performance. The first act occurred on the cusp of a new year. On December 30th, 1978, Nilsen met 14-year-old Stephen Holmes in a local pub. The boy was vulnerable, looking for connection. Nilsen, then 33, offered him drinks and invited him back to Melrose Avenue. They listened to music, they drank, and at some point the boy fell asleep. In the morning, Nilsen awoke with a paralyzing fear. The boy would leave. The thought of being alone again was unbearable. To prevent this departure, he took the cord from his headphones and strangled Stephen Holmes. The act, he would later claim, was almost impulsive, a panicked response to his terror of abandonment. The first murder was not the culmination of a grand plan, but the crossing of a final, horrifying threshold. The silence that followed the boy's death was filled not with guilt, but with a strange, calming sense of possession. Stephen Holmes would not be leaving. The conditions that allowed this horror to take root were woven into the fabric of the era. London in the late 1970s and early 1980s was a city of stark contrasts, grappling with economic decline, high unemployment, and social unrest. For countless young men, it was a place of last resort. They were runaways, drifters, unemployed youths, and Irish immigrants, all drawn to the capital's promise of work or escape, only to find themselves marginalized and invisible. They populated the pubs and homeless shelters, easy prey for a man offering a drink, a meal, or a warm place to sleep. Many were gay or bisexual, living closeted lives that disconnected them from family and support networks. When they disappeared, their absence created few ripples. They were the perfect victims because to the wider world they barely existed at all. Nilsen's authority, his articulate manner, his background as a former police officer lent him an air of respectability that disarmed them. He was not a monster lurking in an alley. He was a kind, lonely man in a pub, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. After that first murder, a ritual began to form, a grotesque parody of domesticity. The initial act of killing was merely the prelude. The true purpose was what came after. For days, sometimes weeks, Nilsen would live with the corpse of his victim. He treated the body as his silent, perfect partner. He would carefully wash it, dress it in clean clothes, and sit it in an armchair. He would talk to it, watch television with it, and share drinks with it. In these macabre tableaus, he finally achieved the connection he craved. A companion who could not argue, could not judge, and most importantly, could not leave. The pattern repeated with terrifying frequency. Young men like Canadian tourist Kenneth Ockenden, 23, and Martin Duffy, 16, were lured back to the flat, strangled and absorbed into this ghastly household. The population of the dead at Melrose Avenue was growing. The machinery of his evil was grimly practical. When the process of decomposition made the corpse's presence untenable, disposal became a necessity. Nilsen's time as an army cook had given him a clinical proficiency with a knife. He would dismember the bodies in his bathtub, a methodical and gruesome task. The smaller parts were bagged and discarded like household waste. The larger sections were hidden beneath the floorboards of his flat. He treated the process with the detached air of a bureaucrat managing a difficult filing problem. The smell of decay was a constant issue, combated with a relentless assault of disinfectants, air fresheners, and incense. When the space under the floor filled up, he turned to the garden. He built bonfires using old tires to intensify the heat and burned the human remains. To his neighbors, he was just another resident doing a bit of gardening. The acrid smoke, just the smell of burning rubbish. The banality of the setting was his greatest shield. Inside Nilsen's mind was a landscape of profound contradiction. He was a man capable of functioning effectively in the world, a union representative who fought for his colleagues' rights, a man who could express empathy for the unemployed people he served at the job center. Yet he maintained this facade while living atop a mass grave of his own making. He compartmentalized his life with chilling success. The murders were not driven by sexual sadism in the conventional sense. The violence was a means to an end. That end was the post-mortem companionship. He was a necrophile, but his obsession was less with the act of death than with the state of being dead. The stillness, the compliance, the permanence. He wrote extensively in notebooks, analyzing his own feelings, rationalizing his actions as the desperate measures of a deeply lonely man. He saw himself not as evil, but as tragic, a victim of his own profound inability to form meaningful relationships with the living. There were moments the killing spree should have ended. A young student named Andrew Ho was lucky. He woke up as Nilsen was attempting to strangle him, fought back, and managed to escape into the night, bleeding and terrified. Another man, Douglas Stewart, also awoke to find Nilsen's hands around his neck, but Stewart was strong enough to overpower his attacker. In a bizarre turn, Nilsen did not press the attack. Instead, he seemed to accept defeat, made the man breakfast, and let him leave. Stewart, bewildered and frightened, did not go to the police. The victims who escaped were often too marginalized or scared to report what had happened. They were in a stranger's flat, often after a night of heavy drinking. They feared they would not be believed, or worse, that they would be judged for their lifestyle. Nilsen's calm, almost apologetic demeanor in these moments of failure further diffused the situation. He was a master of projecting an aura of harmless eccentricity, even in the midst of a murder attempt. The system had no net to catch these near misses, and so the killing continued. By 1981, the house at 195 Melrose Avenue had become saturated with death. The garden soil was mixed with human ash and bone fragments. The space beneath the floorboards was full. The psychic weight of his crimes, combined with the notice of renovation from his landlord, prompted a move. He relocated to the top-floor attic flat at 23 Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill. This new location would prove to be his undoing. It was a smaller space, and critically, it had no garden and no accessible floorboards. The logistics of his murderous hobby had become infinitely more complex. Despite these challenges, the compulsion did not wane. The killings continued at an accelerated pace. At Cranley Gardens, at least 3 more young men would meet their end: John Howlett, Graham Allen, and finally Stephen Sinclair. The victims remained invisible, their disappearances unconnected dots on the vast map of London. They were young men like Billy Sutherland, a 26-year-old from Edinburgh, or Malcolm Barlow, a 23-year-old orphan who had the misfortune of visiting Nilsen on the very day he was meant to report to a psychiatric hospital. They were individuals with histories, families, and futures, all reduced to components in one man's private pathology. The total number of his victims will likely never be known for certain. He confessed to 15 murders, though he was convicted of 6. Each one represented a life stolen and a family left in the agonizing limbo of not knowing. They were the casualties of a society that had failed to see them, failed to protect them, and for years failed to even look for them. While Nilsen was carrying out his horrific routine, the world outside remained oblivious. His colleagues at the job center knew him as Des, a slightly eccentric but intelligent and capable man. His neighbors at Cranley Gardens knew him as the quiet man in the top flat. They complained amongst themselves about the terrible smell that sometimes emanated from his apartment and the recurring problems with the drains, but no one suspected the truth. The official mechanisms of society were equally blind. Missing persons reports were filed for some of the victims, but they were not connected. In an era before centralized databases and DNA technology, linking the disappearances of disparate, marginalized young men across London was a near impossible task. The truth was not that society was actively complicit, but that it was structurally indifferent. The system was not built to notice the absence of men like Martin Duffy or Stephen Holmes. The first cracks in Nilsen's secret world appeared not from a police investigation, but from the simple laws of physics and plumbing. The small old pipes of 23 Cranley Gardens were no match for his new method of disposal. Unable to bury or burn the remains, he was forced to dissect them and flush them down the toilet. He boiled heads on his stove to remove the flesh, creating a sickening bone-laden stew. This biological waste soon overwhelmed the building's drainage system. The external pressure mounted with each complaint from his neighbors and the landlord. The stench was becoming unbearable. The system was backing up, literally and metaphorically. Internally, Nilsen was also under strain. The attic flat felt claustrophobic, a pressure cooker for his pathology. The work of disposal was more demanding, more gruesome, and more risky. He was living in a charnel house of his own making, the air thick with the smell of death and chemicals. His journals from this period reflect a man aware that his system was unsustainable, yet he was powerless to stop the cycle of his compulsion. He was trapped, a prisoner of the very ritual he had created to cure his loneliness. The end was approaching, not through remorse or a crisis of conscience, but through a simple, inevitable logistical failure. The breakthrough came on February 8, 1983. A plumber named Michael Catron was dispatched by a drainage company called Dino Rod to clear the pipes at Cranley Gardens. Working at an external drain cover at the side of the house, he pulled out a clog of foul-smelling, fleshy material. Among the muck, he saw what looked like small bones. Suspicious and disturbed, he cleared the pipe but advised the residents he would need to return the next day. That evening, Nilsen knew he had been discovered. He went into the drain himself and tried to clear the incriminating evidence, but it was too late. The next morning, Catron returned with his supervisor. When they opened the drain cover again, they found it was once more filled with the same horrifying substance. Looking closer in the cold morning light, they could clearly identify what looked like a piece of a human hand. The police were immediately called. Detective Chief Inspector Peter J. of the Hornsey Police Station was the first senior officer on the scene. He looked at the evidence from the drain and knew he was dealing with a homicide. He made the decision to wait for the resident of the top floor flat to return home from work. That evening, Dennis Nilsen walked up the path to his front door and was met by a group of waiting policemen. The confrontation was eerily calm. DCIJ informed him that they were investigating a complaint about the drains and had found what appeared to be human remains. Nilsen feigned surprise. "Good heavens, how awful," he said, the perfect mask of the concerned citizen. Jay pressed him, explaining that the remains seemed to have come from his flat. Then came the simple, devastating question: where is the rest of the body? Nilsen's facade did not crumble. It simply evaporated. Without a change in expression, he replied, "In the wardrobe." The secret world of Dennis Nilsen had collapsed in a single quiet sentence. The search of the flat was a descent into a nightmare. In the wardrobe, police found 2 large plastic bags containing the dismembered body of Stephen Sinclair, Nilsen's final victim. In a tea chest, they found more human heads. The entire apartment was a crime scene, the air heavy with the smell of decomposition. What was most shocking, however, was Nilsen's reaction. He was arrested and taken to the police station. where he began to confess with a strange, almost helpful eagerness. There was no denial, no resistance. He seemed relieved that it was finally over. He spoke to detectives for hours, calmly and methodically detailing 15 murders stretching back 5 years. He drew them maps, showing where the bodies were buried in the garden and hidden under the floorboards of his old flat at Melrose Avenue. He was like a librarian cataloging his collection, providing names, dates, and gruesome details with chilling, bureaucratic precision. The trial of Dennis Nilsen began at the Old Bailey in October 1983. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculating, and monstrous killer. The defense argued for diminished responsibility, claiming he suffered from a personality disorder that impaired his judgment. The central figure was Nilsen himself. On the witness stand, he was articulate, intelligent, and unnervingly composed. He described his crimes in lucid detail, analyzing his own motives with a detached psychological curiosity. This calm demeanor horrified the jury and the public. It was the face of evil, not as a raging, wild-eyed beast, but as a polite, well-spoken civil servant. On November 4th, the jury found him guilty of 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, recommending he serve a minimum of 25 years. He was sent away, leaving a stunned nation to grapple with the reality of the quiet man who had lived for years with the dead. For the families of the victims, the trial brought a horrifying end to years of uncertainty. They finally learned the fate of their missing sons and brothers, a truth more terrible than anything they could have imagined. The survivors, like Douglas Stewart, were left with the lifelong trauma of their escape and the chilling knowledge of how close they came to becoming another name on Nilsen's list. Their stories served as a stark reminder of the thin veil that separates a normal life from an encounter with absolute horror. The case was not a story of a cover-up, but of a profound systemic failure. It exposed the dangerous blind spots within society and law enforcement. It revealed how easily the vulnerable could be preyed upon and how their disappearances could go unnoticed and uninvestigated in a sprawling, anonymous city. The police were criticized for not connecting the missing persons reports, but the truth was more complex. The victims were disparate, their lifestyles transient, and the tools for cross-referencing such cases were primitive. Nilsen's crimes highlighted a desperate need for better communication between police forces and a more compassionate, thorough approach to investigating the disappearances of those living on the fringes of society. Dennis Nilsen became an infamous figure in British criminal history, a byword for the banality of evil. His story was dissected in books, documentaries, and dramas, turning him into a dark cultural artifact. From prison, he sought to control his own narrative, engaging in extensive correspondence and writing a detailed autobiography, History of a Drowning Boy. He never expressed true remorse, only a kind of intellectual fascination with his own psyche. He remained a subject of study and revulsion until his death in prison in 2018. A lonely man who had built his own private hell and in the end was consumed by it. So what is the final chilling lesson of this quiet monster and his house of ghosts? The story of Dennis Nilsen is a testament to the terrifying power of loneliness and the human capacity for self-deception. It is a warning that the most profound horrors are not always committed by frenzied madmen, but can be meticulously curated behind the closed doors of ordinary homes on ordinary streets. It forces us to look past the facades and consider the unseen voids in the lives around us. It asks a deeply uncomfortable question. Have we learned to see the invisible? Are we any better now at noticing the quiet desperation, at hearing the silent screams? Or do the forgotten still walk among us, just one drink away from vanishing forever into the arms of a stranger who only wants them to stay?